Adonijah took Joab, son of Jeruah, and Abiathar, the priest, into his confidence, and they agreed to help him become king. Joab is a general in the army, so he's got a lot of the army behind him. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Ray, and David's personal bodyguard refused to support Adonijah. Probably the name that's really significant in this list is this one right here, Nathan the prophet. This guy, pretty close in there with God. He's got God talking to him, all right? And so you wouldn't want to see him on the list of people who don't support you being king. It's probably not going to work out too well. Adonijah went to the stone of Zoheleth near the spring of En-Rogel, where he sacrificed sheep, cattle, and fattened calves. He invited all of his brothers, the other sons of King David, and all the royal officials of Judah. So it's a cookout, it's a barbecue. And feast down there, and he's getting everyone together, and he's going to have them all acclaim him as king now. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, or Benaiah, or the king's bodyguard, or his brother Solomon. Oh man, so he invited all the children of David except for one, his brother Solomon. It shows that he knew exactly what he was doing, that he knew who had the succession, who David had willed to give the throne down to, was Solomon, and that's why he didn't include him. Well, Nathan the prophet goes to Bathsheba, that's Solomon's mother, and asks her, haven't you heard that Haggith's son Adonijah has made himself king, and our Lord David doesn't even know about it? He's doing this all on the sneak. So now come, let me tell you, give you counsel and save your life and the life of your son Solomon, because they'll almost certainly be killed if Adonijah's bid for power succeeds. And so he gives her a plan, and she executes it, goes into David. It has to go into his sick room where he can't get out anymore to realize these things are going on. And he explains the whole scene to him and what's going on. And of course, David had previously said that Solomon is the one that's going to be the next king. So she ends her speech, which I'm cutting to the chase here. The king, the eyes of all Israel are on you to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my Lord, the king after him. So then the king says to her, take with you the servants and have my son Solomon ride on my own mule and bring him down to Gihon. Let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him there with the oil as the king over Israel, and blow the trumpet and say, long live King Solomon. So he's basically going to install him in a public ceremony. And he's backing it with guys who the people knew were in there with God. Then he says, you shall come up after him, and he shall come and sit down on my throne and be king in my place, for I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and Judah. Well, so they go down, then goes on for another 10, 15 verses describing that they did exactly what he said. And they lead the procession in, they anoint him king, and cry out, long live King Solomon. The whole crowd buys into it. Everyone's starting to shout and cheer. They're excited, and he sits on the throne. And so he's been legitimized by David indirectly. Meanwhile, Adonijah and all the guests who were with him heard the hubbub up in the city of Jerusalem. They hear the crowd cheering and stuff. And they're saying, why is the city making such an uproar? And what happens then is a guy arrives, a messenger, and he says, it's not good. And explains that crowd is cheering because right now Solomon is sitting on David's throne, and they're cheering, long live King Solomon. And so all of these other guys are looking around like, oh my God, our plan has failed. And so we read that all of Adonijah's guests jump up and panic from the banquet table and quickly scattered. Didn't want to be caught in a disloyal act of hatching a coup, and probably be punished if they were caught. So they're just the whole thing fell apart instantly. And we read that Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, so he rushed to the sacred tent and grabbed onto the horns of the altar. Okay, the sacred tent is the tabernacle, which is the place of worship. The temple hasn't been built yet. But they had moved the tabernacle up there, either in or next to Jerusalem. And in it is this brazen altar which has these horns. By clinging on to the horns, what he's doing is claiming sanctuary, and under the theory that nobody's going to want to kill me in the temple here, because that would be like profane to do that. And so I'm not leaving until I get a promise for safety. Well, they came to Solomon and told him about Adonijah seizing the horns of the altar, and that he was pleading, let Solomon swear today that he will not kill me. And Solomon didn't want to kill him. He said, if he's a worthy man, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. But if wickedness is found in him, then he will die. Adonijah was brought before the king and fell on the ground, prostrated himself before King Solomon. And Solomon was like, go on home. Quit worrying about getting killed. But don't mess with me either. He made it clear. Don't do this anymore. But it was actually a pretty striking act of clemency on Solomon's part, considering this guy probably would have wasted him and his family if he had been made king. Chapter 2. As the time of King David's death approached, he gave this charge to his son Solomon. I'm going where everyone on earth must go someday. Take courage and be a man. Observe the requirements of the Lord your God and follow all of his ways. Keep the decrees, the commands, regulations, and the laws written in the law of Moses, so that you'll be successful in all you do and wherever you go. If you do this, then the Lord will keep the promise he made to me. He told me, if your descendants live as they should and follow me faithfully with all their heart and soul, one of them will always sit on the throne of Israel. So he refers back to the Davidic covenant. Anyway, this is pretty cool. Here's David. You hate to see David, a mighty man of valor and stuff. He's so pathetic at this point, but he's getting ready to die. And so at least he hands down a spiritual blessing and good advice to his son. But then, all of a sudden, he busts out with this. And there's something else. He says, now you know that Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me when he murdered my 2 army commanders, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He pretended it was an act of war, but it was done in a time of peace, staining his belt and sandals with innocent blood. Do with him what you think best, but don't let him grow old and go to his grave in peace. Get him. And then he thinks, while you're at it, he says, remember Shemaiah, son of Gera. He cursed me with a terrible curse when I was fleeing to Mahanaim. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan River, I swore by the Lord that I would not kill him. This is a story that's in the second Samuel. This guy just comes randomly out. Here's David running away from his own son, Absalom, with some soldiers. This guy comes screaming out, yelling, shouting curses and throwing things at him. And Abner's like, shall I go cut his head off? And David's like, no, he was sent here by the Lord to rebuke me today because, I probably need to hear that. And so it's a very noble passage there where David's like, you got to listen when people rebuke you. And it was very spiritual. And as he says, we didn't know this from Samuel, but he apparently swore by the Lord that he would not kill him. But he says that oath does not make him an innocent, and it really doesn't apply to you either. So he says, you're a wise man, and you will know how to arrange a bloody death for him. You just read this and you're like, oh my God. What are you reading here? I thought David was this towering spiritual giant who was so humble that he could even let this guy cuss him out and realize that he needed to hear that. And now it turns out this is revenge. This is years later. And he's taking revenge. He's still bitter about what that guy said to me out there that day. He needs a bloody death for that.